Hello everyone and welcome back to Bitwig Studio and Music Production. This is lesson 5.69, and in this lesson we're going to use a separate operator to act as a modulator onto our carrier. Now we could really set this up in any combination we want. Most typically what you're going to do is probably use number 1 as the carrier. That won't always be the case, and sometimes you'll have multiple carriers, but it really translates the same all the way across the spectrum. So just for the sake of it, let's use number 4 as our carrier, and I'm going to just turn off number 1 here, turn on number 4, and there we have our A3 playing at 220 hertz like we'd expect. We'd get the same result if we were to put this on any of our operators. So what we need to do to set up a separate modulator is just turn any one of these on. So I'll go ahead and use number 2 just so you can also start to figure out how this matrix is working. And I'll start by setting this to 1 as well. Now, remember, all we have playing here is operator number 4, so this, what I just dialed in, isn't going to make any difference. But when this will make a difference is when I turn up my modulator depth here and then evoke the frequency modulation. So to do that, I need to find our horizontal row number 4, so that's down here, and I can go over to the 2. Okay, so this would be if I was having operator 1 impart frequency modulation, and this is operator 2, operator 3, and then if I wanted to do 2 itself, I could do it like so. All right, but let's focus on having this sort of a relationship set up. And now when you guys are watching these videos, what I want you to do is to always have Bitwig open and to just see and watch what I do and then hopefully be inspired so that you can jump in the program yourself. It's totally okay if you don't finish these videos, if you're grabbing the concept right away and then go in and experiment, because I obviously can't go through and show you every single value and what it's going to do to the frequency spectrum. But here we have our starting point at 220. And I can start to evoke some frequency modulation here, and we can see what happens when we set this to like a 1-to-1. Okay, so let's watch what happens specifically at this 440 point. So we can see as I crank that up, the new harmonic that's coming up and that's really taking over the frequency spectrum is 440, an octave above. And that makes a lot of sense because we have here 220 being modulated by 220. And so it's going to hype that first harmonic quite a bit. If I take this down and set this to 0.5, okay, so now we're going underneath. And if I pull this up, we're going to see a pretty big hyping at our A2, at our A3, at our, here we have A2, A3, and then the E4 is really being hyped. So let me just show you guys again the difference here. If I pull this to a 1. And we can watch what happens as I pull it down. Like so. And there is a real logic to this, and the logic is based on mathematics, something called Bessel functions, and you can do more research into those if you want, but I personally find that FM synthesis is really something that you just operate and work totally by ear. So you'll hear when things fit just right with the amount of modulation when we get into adding in these independent envelopes. So that's really what it's all about. But for now, I want you to just get used to these relationships, understanding and seeing what's happening to our frequency spectrum as we build these complex waves, and just trying out a bunch of different ratios, keeping in mind things like the octave differences, and those octave differences are always going to be either multiplied by 2 or divided by 2. So I could put this down to 0.25, but at that point we're operating almost more at like an LFO sort of rate. But you can hear what that does. I can double that to 0.5. Double that to 1, double that to 2, etc. And you can do that with each and every one of like the ratios, the perfect ratios. So if I go in here and I decide to set this to 3, Okay, I know that's going to evoke more of the perfect fifth, so if we're in the key of A, that's going to be E. And then we can look at this and see exactly which harmonic is being hyped the most. And a lot of this just has to do with the similar harmonic spectrum that you would find on a sawtooth wave of these two wave shapes if they were being put in here independently. So if we were playing both an A and an E at the same time with sawtooth waves, you'd be able to see where those harmonics are overlapping and which are getting hyped. All right. And again, this also has to do with octave ranges too. So when I'm playing this here and when I'm setting this, this isn't just the E in the same octave range. It's actually above an entire octave range. I'd have to take this down to 1.5. And we can hear what a big difference that has, and how it heightens these frequencies completely differently. But I can, again, double this up to 3. I can go up to 6, etc. And that's always keeping in line that kind of perfect fifth relationship. And no matter where I go with this, if I go to a 3, or I go to a 6, or I even go to a 12, these are very complex waveforms, but they're very harmonic in nature. I can contrast that by going to something, you know, just kind of totally random off the cusp, like 2.65. Let's try something like that. I can go even further, 2.657. And we can listen to what happens and watch the frequency spectrum. And one of the first things you're going to see is quavering. All right, we are not locked in at this kind of a ratio. It sounds pretty good to me, but we're not locked in. It's fighting for space. We're getting a beating effect somewhere in here because we are approaching a perfect ratio of some kind. I'm not sure what exactly it would be. We could pull up on this until we lock things in. Maybe we can try that if we go right to 2.6. This might be a perfect ratio for all I know. What I'm doing here is I'm listening for the beating, and we can hear that starting to occur. And then we hear at 3 how we lock in perfectly. And that's really the name of the game of frequency modulation. It's really an ear-based synthesizer, finding the ratios that kind of work. And obviously, when we start making more complex patches, we're going to go beyond just this one simple modulator to carrier relationship like we have set up here. So feel free to go in there, experiment around, hear the sort of things you can come up with. Don't be afraid to keep it relatively close if you want, so you can stay in a range like 1.25. That's totally cool, or you can go, you know, all the way up to 99, I think. But if that's the case, we may not want that depth to be quite so high. All right, so that's the basis of frequency modulation, and I hope that's been helpful for you. Get in there, mess around. You'll hear from me in the next lesson. Take care.